the scream that tore from Tabitha Garrison's throat. As she tumbled down the rocky mountainside echoed through the Colorado Canyon like the cry of a wounded animal. But she knew no one would come because no one ever had before. Her aunt's final words still rang in her ears, even as the world spun around her in a dizzying kaleidoscope of pine trees and gray stone. "You have been nothing but a burden since the day you were born, girl. Your mother died bringing you into this world, and you have done nothing to justify that sacrifice." The words had been punctuated by a shove, deliberate and cruel, sending Tabitha stumbling backward off the narrow trail, where she had been gathering firewood in the wilderness just outside Gunnison, Colorado in the autumn of 1876. Her body slammed against an outcropping of rock, knocking the wind from her lungs before she continued her descent. Branches tore at her dress and scraped her skin raw. She tried to grab onto something, anything, but her fingers found only air and loose stones that cascaded down with her. The world went black when her head struck a boulder. When consciousness returned, it came slowly, accompanied by a throbbing pain that seemed to pulse through every inch of her battered body. Tabitha opened her eyes to find herself staring up at a canopy of golden aspen leaves that trembled in the mountain breeze. The sky beyond was that particular shade of blue that only existed at high altitude, so pure and clear it almost hurt to look at. She tried to move and immediately regretted it as white-hot agony lanced through her left leg. "Easy now." The voice was deep, rumbling like distant thunder and completely unfamiliar. "You took quite a fall." Tabitha turned her head, which proved to be another mistake as the world tilted sickeningly. When her vision cleared, she found herself looking up at a man who seemed carved from the mountains themselves. He knelt beside her, and even crouching, his size was formidable. Broad shoulders strained against a buckskin shirt, and his arms were thick with muscle clearly defined even through the leather. His hair was dark brown, and fell past his shoulders in waves that caught the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. A full beard covered the lower half of his face, but his eyes were what held her attention. They were the color of warm honey, and they looked at her with a concern that Tabitha had never seen directed at her before. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, her throat raw from screaming. "Name is Garrett Kincaid," he said. His hands moved over her with surprising gentleness for someone so large, checking for broken bones. "I was tracking an elk when I heard you fall. That leg is broken and you have got a nasty gash on your head. Can you tell me your name?" "Tabitha Garrison." She winced as his fingers probed the swelling around her ankle. "My aunt, she pushed me off the trail near the logging camp." Garrett's hand stilled for a moment, and when she looked at his face, she saw his jaw had tightened beneath his beard. "Someone pushed you deliberately." "She said I was a burden." The words came out small and broken, and Tabitha hated the weakness in her voice. "She has always said that. I should not have been surprised." "No one deserves to be pushed off a mountain," Garrett said firmly. He stood then, and Tabitha had to crane her neck back to see his full height. He had to be well over 6 feet tall, with a frame that spoke of years spent working in these unforgiving mountains. "I am going to get you to safety, Miss Garrison. This is going to hurt, but I need you to trust me." Trust was not something Tabitha had much experience with, but as she looked up at this stranger with his kind eyes and gentle hands, she found herself nodding. Garrett moved with practiced efficiency, fashioning a splint for her leg from branches and strips of cloth he tore from his own shirt. The pain made her cry out, but he talked to her through it in that steady, calm voice, telling her about the mountains, about the elk he had been tracking, about anything and everything to keep her focused on something other than the agony. When he finally lifted her into his arms, Tabitha was struck by how carefully he held her, as though she were something precious rather than the burden she had always been told she was. His chest was solid as oak beneath her cheek, and she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. He smelled of pine smoke and leather and the clean, crisp air of the high country. "Where are we going?" she asked as he began to walk, his stride long and sure even on the uneven terrain. "My cabin. It is about 2 miles from here. You need proper care, and I have supplies there." He adjusted her weight slightly, and Tabitha realized she could not weigh much to him at all. "When you are healed, we will figure out what to do about your aunt." The journey to his cabin passed in a haze of pain and growing exhaustion. Tabitha drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of the changing landscape around them. At some point, the aspen gave way to denser pine forest, and the sound of rushing water grew louder. When she opened her eyes again, they were crossing a creek on stepping stones that Garrett navigated with the confidence of someone who had walked this path 1,000 times. His cabin appeared suddenly, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. It was larger than Tabitha had expected, built from massive logs that fit together with expert craftsmanship. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, and there were actual glass windows, a luxury in these remote mountains. A small barn stood nearby, and she could hear the soft nickering of horses. Garrett pushed open the door with his shoulder and carried her inside. The interior was simple but well-maintained, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a bed covered in fur pelts in the corner. Rough-hewn furniture filled the space, all clearly handmade, and the scent of wood smoke and something savory cooking filled the air. He laid her gently on the bed, then immediately set about building up the fire. "I am going to need to set that leg properly," he said without looking at her. "And clean your wounds. Do you want whiskey for the pain?" "I do not drink," Tabitha said automatically, repeating the lesson her aunt had drilled into her since childhood. Garrett turned then, and there was something fierce in his expression. "Your aunt is not here. And what I am about to do is going to hurt worse than anything you have felt before. The whiskey will help." He was right, though Tabitha would never have admitted it aloud. The whiskey burned going down, but it created a pleasant warmth in her belly that spread through her limbs. When Garrett set her leg, she screamed into the leather belt he had given her to bite down on, but the alcohol took enough edge off the pain that she did not pass out. Afterward, as he cleaned the gash on her head and the various scrapes and bruises covering her body, Tabitha studied him through half-closed eyes. His hands were large and calloused, scarred from years of hard work, but they moved over her injuries with a delicacy that surprised her. When he brushed her hair back from her forehead to better reach the wound at her temple, his touch was feather-light. "Thank you," she whispered when he finally finished and pulled a blanket over her, "for saving me." Garrett met her eyes, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "You do not need to thank me for doing what any decent person would do." He paused, then added, "Get some rest, Miss Garrison. You are safe here. Safe." It was such a simple word, but Tabitha could not remember the last time she had truly felt it. As exhaustion pulled her down into sleep, she found herself believing him. The next days passed in a blur of fever and pain. Tabitha's injuries had been worse than either of them had initially realized, and infection set in despite Garrett's careful ministrations. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of his constant presence. He bathed her forehead with cool cloths, forced broth between her lips, and changed her bandages with steady hands. When the fever made her delirious, she heard his voice reading to her from books she did not recognize, the words washing over her like a soothing tide. Once, in the depths of her fever, she cried out for her mother, a woman she had never known. Garrett's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers wrapping around hers with gentle strength. "You are not alone," he murmured. "I am right here." When the fever finally broke on the fourth day, Tabitha woke to find herself weak as a newborn kitten but clear-headed for the first time since the fall. Garrett was sitting in a chair beside the bed, mending a shirt by the light of the fire. He looked up when she stirred, and relief flooded his features. "Welcome back," he said, setting aside his sewing. "You gave me quite a scare there." "How long?" Her voice came out as a croak, and he immediately reached for a cup of water, helping her sit up enough to drink. "4 days since I found you. You have been fever sick for 3 of them." He studied her face with those warm, honey eyes. "How do you feel?" "Like I fell off a mountain," Tabitha said, surprised to find she could still manage a weak joke. The corner of Garrett's mouth twitched under his beard, the closest thing to a smile she had seen from him. "That would explain it." He sobered quickly. "Miss Garrison, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you have anywhere else to go, anyone who would take you in?" The question made her chest tighten. "No. My parents are dead. My aunt was my only living relative, and she made it clear every day of my life that she resented my existence. I worked as her servant in exchange for room and board, but I have no money of my own, no skills beyond cooking and cleaning and mending." She looked away, shame burning in her cheeks. "I am exactly what she always said I was, a burden. Look at me." The command in Garrett's voice was gentle but firm. When she met his eyes, he held her gaze. "You are not a burden, do you hear me? Whatever poison that woman poured into your ears, it was lies, all of it." "You do not know me," Tabitha protested. "You do not know what I am like." Maybe she was right. Maybe I am worthless. Garrett stood abruptly, and for a moment Tabitha thought she had angered him. But when he spoke, his voice was controlled, though she could hear the emotion simmering beneath. "I have spent 4 days watching you fight for your life. I have seen your strength, your courage. You survived a fall that should have killed you, and you fought through fever that would have taken a weaker person. That is not worthless." He ran a hand through his long hair, a gesture of frustration. "I know what it is like to be told you are less than nothing. My own father said I would never amount to anything, that I was too wild, too rough for civilization. That is why I came to these mountains, to prove I could make something of myself on my own terms." The admission hung in the air between them. Tabitha had never had anyone speak to her so honestly, had never had anyone see past the role her aunt had forced her into. "What happened to your father?" she asked softly. "He died 5 years ago, still believing I was a failure." Garrett's expression was distant, lost in memory. "I went back for the funeral. My mother begged me to stay to take over the family farm, but I could not. This is my home now. These mountains, this life I have built. It is simple, but it is mine." "It is beautiful," Tabitha said, meaning it. Through the window, she could see the clearing bathed in afternoon sunlight, the mountains rising beyond in shades of purple and gray. "Lonely, though." "Sometimes," Garrett admitted. He returned to his chair, his massive frame making the furniture look almost comically small. "I go into Gunnison once a month for supplies and news. Sometimes I guide hunting parties or help with logging operations when the money is good, but mostly it is just me and the mountains." "And now me," Tabitha said, "at least until I am healed enough to leave." Something flickered across Garrett's face there and gone too quickly for her to identify. "You do not have to leave. Not if you do not want to. You could stay here. Help me with the cabin, the horses. It would be a partnership, not charity." The offer stunned her into silence. She searched his face for signs of mockery or ulterior motives, but found only sincerity. "You do not even know me," she repeated, but with less conviction this time. "Then we will get to know each other." He leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. "Miss Garrison, I am not going to lie to you. Life up here is hard. Winter comes early and stays late. We are miles from the nearest town. You would be isolated and the work would be demanding. But you would have a roof over your head, food in your belly, and no one would ever call you a burden again. He paused, then added quietly, and you would be safe. Tabitha felt tears prick her eyes. Why are you doing this? Why are you being so kind to me? Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because I know what it is like to believe you are worthless, and because when I look at you, I do not see a burden. I see someone who deserves better than what life has given her. The tears spilled over then, tracking hot paths down her cheeks. No one had ever spoken to her like this, had ever suggested she might deserve anything at all. Garrett reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away and brush the tears from her face with his thumb. His touch was impossibly gentle for such a large, rough man. You do not have to decide now, he said. Focus on healing. Everything else can wait. But Tabitha knew her decision was already made. Where else would she go? What other option did she have? More than that, though, something in her chest had eased when Garrett made his offer, as though a weight she had been carrying her entire life had suddenly been lifted. I would like to stay, she said. If you truly mean it, I mean it. Garrett's hand lingered on her cheek for a heartbeat longer before he pulled away. Now, let me get you some broth. You need to eat. As he moved around the cabin, preparing food with the easy competence of someone long accustomed to caring for himself, Tabitha watched him with growing curiosity. He was unlike any man she had ever met. The men in Gunnison had been rough and crude, viewing women as either servants or property. But Garrett treated her with respect, spoke to her as an equal. She found herself wanting to know more about him. This mountain man who had saved her life and offered her sanctuary without asking for anything in return. Over the following weeks, as Tabitha's body slowly healed, she learned the rhythms of Garrett's life. He rose before dawn each morning, building up the fire and making coffee so strong it could strip paint. While she was still bedridden, he would bring her breakfast, then head out to tend his horses and check his trap lines. He hunted and fished, bringing back game that he butchered with expert precision. In the evenings, he would read to her from his small collection of books, his deep voice bringing the words to life. The first time Tabitha was able to walk, even with the crutch Garrett had fashioned for her, she felt like she had won a great victory. She managed to make it from the bed to the table, where Garrett had laid out supper. The pride in his eyes when he looked at her made her feel 10 feet tall. You are doing well, he said, helping her settle into the chair. Another few weeks and you will be running around like nothing ever happened. I do not know about running, Tabitha said with a small smile, but I will settle for being able to help around here. I feel useless just lying in bed all day. You are recovering from serious injuries. That is not useless. Garrett served her a portion of venison stew that smelled incredible. But I will not lie and say I would not appreciate the help. Cooking is not my strong suit. Tabitha tasted the stew and had to suppress a grimace. It was edible, but just barely. Too much salt and the meat was tough from overcooking. It is fine, she lied politely. Garrett's laugh was a deep rumble that filled the cabin. You are a terrible liar, Miss Garrison. I know my cooking is awful. I have been eating my own food for 5 years, so I am well aware of its shortcomings. Call me Tabitha, she said impulsively. Miss Garrison sounds so formal. Tabitha. He said her name slowly as though tasting it. It suits you. And you should call me Garrett, or Gare if you prefer. Only my mother called me Mr. Kincaid, and only when she was angry with me. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the wind whistling through the pines outside. Tabitha found herself studying Garrett when she thought he was not looking, noting the way the firelight caught in his hair, the strength in his hands as he broke apart a piece of bread. He was a handsome man, she realized, in a rough, untamed way. Not polished or refined like the merchants and bankers who occasionally pass through Gunnison, but real. Solid. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked, catching her staring. Tabitha felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Just that I cannot remember the last time I sat at a table as an equal rather than a servant. My aunt always made me eat in the kitchen after she and her guests had finished." The muscle in Garrett's jaw jumped. "Your aunt sounds like a truly horrible woman." "She was not always cruel," Tabitha said, though she was not sure why she felt the need to defend the woman who had pushed her off a mountain. "After my mother died and my father followed her 6 months later, she took me in when she did not have to. She fed me and clothed me. I suppose she thought that was enough. It was not enough, not even close." Garrett's voice was firm. "A child deserves love, not just food and shelter. You deserved better." The simple statement made Tabitha's throat tight. "I do not think she knew how to love anyone. Her husband had died before I came to live with her, and she had no children of her own. Maybe she was just lonely and bitter. That does not excuse what she did to you." Garrett stood and began clearing the dishes. "You have a kind heart, Tabitha, to try to find understanding for someone who showed you none, but you do not owe her your forgiveness." It was the first time anyone had given her permission to be angry, to acknowledge the injustice of her treatment. Tabitha found tears stinging her eyes again. "I do not know if I can forgive her, especially not for pushing me off that trail. If you had not found me, I would have died out there. But I did find you." Garrett returned to the table and crouched beside her chair so they were at eye level. "And you are here now, and you are safe. That is what matters." Tabitha reached out hesitantly and touched his bearded cheek. He went very still, his breath catching. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Garrett's hand came up to cover hers, pressing it against his face. "You do not need to keep thanking me." "Yes, I do." She met his eyes and saw her own emotions reflected there, a connection forming that went beyond gratitude or kindness. "You saved my life, Garrett. That deserves more thanks than I could ever give." For a moment, they stayed frozen like that, hands touching, eyes locked. Then Garrett cleared his throat and gently pulled away. "You should rest. You overdid it today with the walking." He was right. Tabitha's leg was throbbing and exhaustion pulled at her. But as Garrett helped her back to bed, she found herself reluctant to let go of his arm. Being close to him made her feel safe in a way she had never experienced before. The autumn deepened, the aspen leaves falling in golden drifts that covered the ground around the cabin. Tabitha's leg healed slowly but steadily, and she began taking on more of the household tasks. She discovered she enjoyed cooking for someone who appreciated her efforts. Garrett's face when he tasted her first loaf of bread, fluffy and perfect and still warm from the oven, was worth every moment of effort it had taken. "This is incredible," he said around a mouthful, his eyes closing in bliss. "Tabitha, where did you learn to cook like this?" "My aunt insisted I learn every domestic skill," she explained, pleased by his reaction. "She said it would make me more useful." "I never particularly enjoyed cooking for her, but I find I like doing it for you." Garrett met her eyes across the table. "Everything you make is a blessing. You are a blessing." The words caught her off guard. In all her 22 years, no one had ever called her a blessing. She had been a burden, an obligation, a duty, never a blessing. The tears came without warning, and she covered her face with her hands, embarrassed by her emotional response. "Tabitha!" Garrett was beside her in an instant, his large hand gentle on her shoulder. "What is wrong?" "Did I say something to upset you?" "No," she managed through her tears. "You said something wonderful. I just do not know how to handle it. No one has ever called me that before." Garrett knelt beside her chair and carefully pulled her hands from her face. Then they were all fools. He brushed her tears away with his thumbs, his touch tender. "You are a blessing, Tabitha. To me, you are. Having you here, it has changed everything. The cabin feels like a home now instead of just a place to sleep. I wake up looking forward to the day instead of just going through the motions." "That is because of you." "I feel the same way," Tabitha admitted. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I matter, like I am more than just a burden to be endured." "You matter," Garrett said fiercely. "You matter so much." His hands framed her face, and Tabitha's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. "I know it has only been a few weeks, and I know this is probably too soon, but I need you to know something. I care about you, Tabitha. More than I should, more than is probably wise, but I cannot help it." Tabitha's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I care about you too," she whispered. "I think I started caring about you from the moment you found me on that mountainside." Garrett's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Yeah, yeah." She reached up and covered his hands with hers. "You are the first person who has ever made me feel valued. The first person who has ever been kind to me without expecting something in return. How could I not care about you?" He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and pressed his forehead against hers. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, connected in a way that went beyond words. When Garrett finally pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I should get back to work," he said, his voice rough. "I have wood to chop before the snow comes." "Garrett," Tabitha caught his hand before he could stand. "Will you kiss me?" His eyes widened. "Tabitha, I do not want you to feel pressured. You are staying in my home, dependent on me. I never want you to think you owe me anything." "I do not feel pressured," she assured him. "I feel the opposite of pressured. I feel free. For the first time in my life, I get to choose something for myself, and I choose you." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and sweet. Garrett's lips were soft beneath his beard, and he held her as though she were made of spun glass. It was Tabitha's first kiss, and she felt it all the way down to her toes. When they finally parted, both of them were breathing hard. "That was perfect," she said, a smile spreading across her face. Garrett grinned, the expression transforming his usually serious features. "I think we can do better with practice." "Then we should practice a lot," Tabitha said boldly, surprising herself. His laugh was warm and rich. "I think that can be arranged." The first snow came in late October, fat flakes falling from a gray sky to blanket the world in white. Tabitha stood at the window, watching the transformation with wonder. She had seen snow before, of course, but never like this. In Gunnison, snow had meant cold drafts in the attic room where she slept, meant trudging through icy streets on errands for her aunt. Here, it was beautiful. Garrett came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on top of her head. It had become a familiar gesture over the past weeks, and Tabitha leaned back into his warmth. "We are going to be snowed in soon," he said. "Once winter really sets in, we will not be able to get down to Gunnison until spring. Are you going to be all right with that?" "Being stuck up here with just me for company? I cannot think of anywhere I would rather be," Tabitha said honestly. "Or anyone I would rather be stuck with." She felt him smile against her hair. "Good, because I was worried you might get cabin fever." "I might," she admitted. "But then you will just have to find creative ways to keep me entertained." Garrett spun her around, his eyes dancing with mischief. "Is that so? What kind of entertainment did you have in mind?" Tabitha reached up and pulled his face down to hers, kissing him with a confidence that still surprised her. She had spent so long being told she was worthless that claiming what she wanted felt revolutionary. But Garrett made it easy. He never made her feel foolish or forward. He simply kissed her back with an enthusiasm that left her breathless. "I can think of a few things," she said when they parted. "The winter months were hard but happy. The cold was brutal, the isolation complete. Some days the snow fell so thick and fast that Tabitha could not see the barn from the cabin window. But inside, with the fire roaring and Garrett beside her, she had never been warmer. They fell into an easy routine. Garrett would wake first, as always, and build up the fire before heading out to tend the horses and check his snares. Tabitha would make breakfast, and they would eat together, talking about everything and nothing. She learned about his childhood on a farm in Missouri, about the constant disappointment in his father's eyes, about the day he had finally had enough and headed west to the Colorado mountains. She told him about her parents, the stories her aunt had reluctantly shared about the mother she had never known, about growing up in the shadow of grief and resentment. "Your mother would be proud of you," Garrett said one morning as they sat drinking coffee. "You are strong and kind and beautiful. Everything a parent could hope for." "I wish I could have known her," Tabitha said wistfully. "My aunt made it sound like losing her was my fault, like I stole something precious from her. But I did not ask to be born. I did not ask for her to die. Of course you did not." Garrett reached across the table and laced his fingers through hers. "Your mother made a choice to bring you into this world. That was her decision, not yours. And I would bet everything I own that if she could see you now, she would think it was worth it." The certainty in his voice made Tabitha's chest ache in the best way. "How are you so good at this? At knowing exactly what to say?" "Practice," he said with a small smile. "I spent a lot of years telling myself the same things, learning to believe I had value despite what my father thought. It gets easier the more you hear it." "Then keep telling me," Tabitha said. "Please, I do not think I will ever get tired of hearing it." "You are a blessing," Garrett said, his voice warm and sincere. "You are valuable and important, and you matter. You are not a burden, and you never were. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." He said some variation of it every single morning, sometimes before she was even fully awake. The words became as much a part of her routine as coffee and breakfast, something she began to expect and then to crave. Slowly, gradually, she began to believe them. In December, a massive blizzard trapped them inside for 3 days straight. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the shutters and piling snow against the walls. Garrett kept the fire fed around the clock, and they huddled together under layers of furs and blankets. It was during this storm, pressed close in the darkness with the world raging outside, that Tabitha finally told Garrett she loved him. "I love you," she whispered against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her ear. "I do not know when it happened exactly, but I do. I love you, Garrett Kincaid." His arms tightened around her. "I love you too, Tabitha. I have loved you almost from the beginning. I was just afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon, afraid you would think I was trying to take advantage." "Never," she said fiercely. "You have been nothing but honorable. You have given me everything and asked for nothing in return." "I want something now," Garrett said quietly. Tabitha pulled back enough to see his face in the firelight. "What?" "I want you to marry me." The words came out in a rush, as though he had been holding them back for a long time. "I know we have not known each other long, and I know this life is not easy, but I cannot imagine spending another day without you as my wife. I want to wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build a future with you, have children with you, grow old with you. Marry me, Tabitha, please." Joy flooded through her, so intense it was almost painful. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Garrett kissed her then, deep and thorough, a kiss that promised a lifetime of mornings and evenings, of seasons changing and years passing. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "I do not have a ring," Garrett said apologetically. "I was not exactly planning this." The words just came out. "I do not need a ring," Tabitha assured him. "I just need you." But the next morning she woke to find Garrett already up, working at the table with his tools. He looked up when she approached and held out his hand. In his palm was a simple band carved from wood, polished smooth and warm. "It is not much," he said, "but until I can get to town for a proper ring, I wanted you to have something." Tabitha took the ring with trembling fingers. It was beautiful in its simplicity, clearly made with care and love. She slipped it onto her finger and found it fit perfectly. "It is everything," she said. "Thank you." They were married on a clear day in January by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through the area. Garrett had spotted his smoke from a distance and ridden out to invite him to the cabin. The ceremony was simple, conducted in front of the fireplace with only the mountains as witnesses, but Tabitha had never been happier. She wore her best dress, mended and cleaned until it looked almost new, and Garrett had trimmed his beard and tied back his hair. He looked impossibly handsome, his honey-colored eyes bright with joy as he said his vows. "I promise to honor you, protect you, and cherish you for as long as I live," he said, his voice steady and sure. "You are my greatest blessing, Tabitha, and I will spend every day making sure you know it." "I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes," Tabitha replied, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved my life in every way that matters, Garrett. I love you more than words can express." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart soar. This was what love was supposed to be, she thought. This feeling of being valued, cherished, protected. Not the duty and obligation her aunt had shown her, but genuine affection and respect. That night, in the privacy of their cabin, Garrett made love to her with the same gentleness he had shown since the day he found her. He was careful of her still healing leg, mindful of her inexperience, and when she cried from the overwhelming emotion of it all, he held her close and whispered that he loved her over and over until she believed it in every fiber of her being. The winter passed in a blur of quiet contentment. Tabitha had never known that life could be so peaceful, so full of simple joys. She learned to read better with Garrett's patient help, and he taught her to handle a rifle so she could protect herself when he was away from the cabin. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, sharing their dreams and fears and hopes for the future. "I want children," Tabitha admitted one evening as they lay tangled together in bed. "I know that probably sounds foolish given my own childhood, but I want the chance to do it better. To show a child what real love looks like." "It does not sound foolish at all," Garrett said, his hand tracing patterns on her shoulder. "I want that too. I want a whole cabin full of children if we are blessed with them. Boys and girls running wild through these mountains, growing up free and happy." "That sounds perfect." Tabitha smiled in the darkness. "Do you think we will be good parents?" "I think we will be wonderful parents. We both know what not to do, which is half the battle." He kissed the top of her head. "And we have so much love to give. Our children will never doubt they are wanted." Spring came late to the mountains, but when it finally arrived, it transformed the world. The snow melted in rushing streams, wildflowers burst from the earth in riots of color, and the aspens unfurled fresh green leaves. Garrett took Tabitha fishing in the creek, and she laughed as she tried and failed to catch anything. They rode his horses through meadows carpeted with lupine and columbine, and Tabitha felt as though she could breathe properly for the first time in her life. In April, Garrett announced they needed to go into Gunnison for supplies. Tabitha felt a flutter of nerves at the thought of returning to the town where her aunt lived, but Garrett squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We do not have to see her if you do not want to," he said. "We can get our supplies and leave." "I think I need to see her," Tabitha said slowly. "Not to reconcile or forgive, but to show her that I survived, that I am happy, that I proved her wrong about being a burden." The ride down to Gunnison took most of the day, and Tabitha found herself pressing close to Garrett as they approached the town. It looked smaller than she remembered, the buildings shabby and worn. People stared as they rode down the main street, and Tabitha heard whispers following in their wake. "That is her," someone said. "Tabitha Garrison. We all thought she was dead." They stopped at the general store first, and the proprietor's eyes went wide when he saw Tabitha. "Miss Garrison, your aunt said you ran off months ago. She has been telling everyone you abandoned her." "I did not run off," Tabitha said quietly. "She pushed me off a mountain trail. I would have died if my husband had not found me." The word husband caused a fresh wave of whispers. Garrett stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring at her back. "We are here for supplies," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And then we will be on our way." They had just finished loading their purchases onto the pack horse when a familiar voice cut through the air. "Tabitha, is that really you?" Tabitha turned to find her aunt standing in the street, looking older and more haggard than she remembered. For a moment, fear fluttered in her chest, an old familiar response to that harsh voice. But then Garrett's hand found hers, strong and warm, and the fear faded. "Hello, Aunt Helen," she said, pleased to find her voice steady. Helen's eyes narrowed as they took in Tabitha's appearance, the new dress Garrett had bought her, the way she stood tall and confident instead of hunched and afraid. "So you survived. I suppose you have been telling everyone I tried to kill you." "I have been telling them the truth," Tabitha corrected. "You pushed me, I fell, I nearly died, but I was found and I healed and I am happy now, happier than I ever was with you." "You ungrateful girl," Helen spat. "After everything I did for you." "You gave me food and shelter," Tabitha acknowledged. "But you never gave me kindness or love. You made me feel worthless every single day. But you were wrong, Aunt Helen. I am not worthless. I am not a burden. I am a wife, and soon I hope to be a mother. I am building a life full of love and joy, and you have no part in it." Helen's face turned purple with rage. "You cannot speak to me that way." "Yes, she can," Garrett said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "She is not your servant anymore. She is my wife, and she is under my protection. If you come near her again, if you so much as speak her name, you will answer to me. Are we clear?" The threat was unmistakable, and Helen took a step back. "She is not worth all this trouble," she muttered. "That is where you are wrong," Garrett said. "She is worth everything." He turned to Tabitha, his expression softening. "Are you ready to go home? Home?" The word settled into Tabitha's chest like a blessing. "Yes," she said. "Let us go home." They left Gunnison without looking back, and as the miles fell away behind them, Tabitha felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had faced her aunt and survived. More than that, she had stood up for herself, had claimed her worth. The scared, broken girl who had fallen down that mountain was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who knew she was loved. By the time they reached the cabin, night had fallen and the stars were brilliant overhead. Garrett helped Tabitha down from her horse and pulled her into his arms. "I am proud of you," he said. "What you did today took tremendous courage." "I could not have done it without you," Tabitha said. "You have given me the strength to believe in myself." "You always had that strength," Garrett corrected. "I just helped you see it." They stood there in the starlight, holding each other, and Tabitha thought about how far she had come. 6 months ago, she had been thrown away like trash, left to die alone on a mountainside. Now she had a husband who loved her, a home where she was valued, and a future full of promise. The summer was glorious, warm days and cool nights that made sleeping under the stars irresistible. Garrett taught Tabitha to track game and read the weather in the clouds. They spent long afternoons lying in meadows, talking about nothing and everything, and Tabitha learned what it meant to be truly content. In August, she realized she was pregnant. The signs were unmistakable, and when she told Garrett, his joy was incandescent. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping with delight, then immediately set her down carefully as though she might break. "Are you happy?" he asked, his hands on her still flat belly. "I am terrified," Tabitha admitted. "But yes, I am happy, so happy I could burst with it." "You are going to be an amazing mother," Garrett said firmly. "This child is going to be so loved, so wanted, everything you should have been." The pregnancy was not easy. Tabitha was sick most mornings, and as her belly grew, her legs sometimes ached where it had been broken. But Garrett was attentive and patient, rubbing her feet when they swelled and holding her hair when she was ill. Every morning, without fail, he told her she was a blessing, and every morning she believed it a little more. "You are my greatest blessing," he whispered one morning as he helped her out of bed, her belly now round and prominent. "You and this little one. I cannot believe how lucky I am." "I am the lucky one," Tabitha insisted. "You saved me, Garrett, in every possible way. We saved each other," he said, kissing her forehead. "Now come on. I made breakfast and it is only slightly burned." Their son was born on a cold March morning in 1877, arriving with a lusty cry that filled the cabin. Garrett had ridden down to fetch the midwife from Gunnison a week earlier, and the woman had stayed at the cabin waiting for labor to begin. When she finally placed the baby in Tabitha's arms, exhausted and exhilarated and more in love than she had thought possible, Tabitha looked down at the tiny, perfect face and felt her heart expand. "Hello, Thomas," she whispered, naming him after her father. "Welcome to the world." Garrett sat beside her on the bed, his large hand cradling the baby's head with infinite gentleness. "He is perfect," he breathed, wonder in his voice. "Tabitha, we made this perfect little person." "What do you think?" she asked, watching his face. "Are you disappointed it is not a girl?" "Disappointed? Are you insane?" Garrett laughed, the sound joyful and free. "I do not care if we have 10 boys or 10 girls or any combination. As long as they are healthy and you are healthy, I will be the happiest man alive." Thomas was a good baby, alert and curious from the start. Tabitha sometimes watched Garrett with their son, marveling at how gentle he could be for such a large, strong man. He sang to Thomas in his deep, rumbling voice, carried him around the cabin pointing out everything and explaining it in detail, and changed dirty diapers without complaint. "You are a natural," Tabitha said one evening, watching Garrett rock their son to sleep. "I never knew I could love something this much," Garrett said quietly. "When I look at him, my chest feels like it might explode. Is that normal?" "I think that is exactly what being a parent is supposed to feel like," Tabitha said. She joined him beside the cradle Garrett had carved from pine, watching their son's tiny chest rise and fall. "I want him to always know he is loved. I want him to grow up confident and secure, never doubting his worth." "He will," Garrett assured her. "We will make sure of it," and they did. Thomas grew from an infant to a toddler, then a little boy with his father's honey-colored eyes and his mother's dark hair. He was fearless and adventurous, climbing trees and chasing rabbits through the meadows. Garrett taught him to ride almost before he could walk, and Tabitha taught him letters and numbers, determined that he would have the education she had lacked. 2 years after Thomas was born, Tabitha gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. She was quieter than her brother, thoughtful and observant with Garrett's build and Tabitha's features. Then came another son, James, who arrived laughing and never seemed to stop. 3 children filled the cabin with noise and chaos and more love than Tabitha had ever dreamed possible. "Remember when you said you wanted a cabin full of children?" Tabitha asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. The children were asleep inside, finally worn out from a day of playing. "I do," Garrett said, his arm around her shoulders. "I would say we are getting there." "Are you happy?" Tabitha asked, though she knew the answer. She could see it in his face every day, in the way he smiled at her across the breakfast table, in the gentle way he tucked the children in at night. "I am happier than I ever thought I could be," Garrett said honestly. "Some days I cannot believe this is my life. That I get to wake up every morning to you and our children, that I found you on that mountainside." He paused, then added, "Or that you found me. However you want to look at it. We found each other," Tabitha said. She leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent of pine and wood smoke. "And I am grateful every single day." The years rolled on, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Thomas became a skilled hunter and tracker, learning everything Garrett could teach him about living in the mountains. Sarah developed a talent for drawing, sketching the wildlife and landscapes around them with surprising skill. James was the social one, making friends with every trapper and hunter who passed through, charming them all with his easy grin and quick wit. Garrett expanded the cabin twice, adding rooms as the family grew. He built furniture and mended fences, hunted game and tended horses, and through it all, he never once made Tabitha feel like anything less than his equal partner. They made decisions together, raised their children together, built their life together. Every morning, without fail, Garrett told Tabitha she was a blessing. Sometimes he said it before she woke, whispering it against her hair. Sometimes he announced it over breakfast, making the children giggle. Sometimes he saved it for when they were alone, the words a private promise between them. But he never forgot, and Tabitha never tired of hearing it. "You are my greatest blessing," he said one morning as they stood watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold and pink. 20 years had passed since he had found her broken and bleeding on that mountainside, and they had been the best years of both their lives. "Every morning I wake up and think, how did I get so lucky?" "I think the same thing," Tabitha said. She was older now, streaks of gray in her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of smiling. But when Garrett looked at her, she still felt beautiful. "I used to think I was a burden, that my very existence was a mistake, but you showed me that was never true." "You were never a burden," Garrett said fiercely, the same conviction in his voice now as 20 years ago. "You were always a blessing. I am just glad I was the one who got to prove it to you." Their children grew and eventually started families of their own. Thomas married a sweet girl from Gunnison and built a cabin down the valley. Sarah fell in love with a traveling artist and moved to Denver, though she visited often. James stayed closest to home, building his own cabin just a mile away and stopping by almost daily to check on his parents. Garrett and Tabitha settled into the quiet contentment of grandparenthood, delighting in the parade of grandchildren who filled their home with laughter. They were slower now, their bodies marked by years of hard work and mountain living, but they were no less devoted to each other. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching another sunset, Tabitha reached for Garrett's hand. He took it automatically, his fingers threading through hers as they had done countless times before. "You remember the day you found me?" she asked. "Every detail," Garrett said. "I thought you were dead at first. When I realized you were breathing, I knew I had to save you. I did not know then that you would end up saving me right back." "How did I save you?" Tabitha asked, genuinely curious. Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Before you, this was just a place to hide. I was running from my father's disappointment, from the feeling that I would never be good enough. But you made this into a home. You gave me purpose and joy and a family. You made me believe I could be the man I wanted to be." "You were always that man," Tabitha said softly. "You just needed someone to see it." "And you needed someone to see you," Garrett replied. "To see past what your aunt told you and recognize your worth. I am glad I got to be that person." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called and the evening breeze rustled through the pines. It was the same view they had shared for decades, and Tabitha never tired of it. "You have any regrets?" Garrett asked suddenly. Tabitha considered the question carefully. She thought about the girl she had been, scared and beaten down, convinced she was worthless. She thought about the woman she had become, strong and confident and deeply loved. She thought about the life they had built, the children they had raised, the love they had shared. "Not a single one," she said finally. "Everything that happened, even the painful parts, led me here, led me to you. How could I regret that?" "I feel the same way," Garrett said. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You are still my greatest blessing, Tabitha. After all these years, that has never changed. And you are mine," she said. "You saved me, Garrett, not just that day on the mountain, but every day since. You taught me what love really means." As darkness fell around them, they went inside to the cabin that had been their sanctuary for so many years. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Garrett banked the coals for the night while Tabitha prepared for bed, their movements synchronized from decades of practice. When they finally lay down together, Garrett pulled Tabitha close, her back against his chest, his arm around her waist. It was how they had slept for 20 years and how they would sleep for all the years to come. "Good night, my love," Garrett whispered. "My greatest blessing." "Good night," Tabitha replied, safe and warm and loved. "I will see you in the morning." And in the morning, true to form, Garrett would wake her with those same words he had spoken every single day since they married. He would tell her she was a blessing, and she would believe it because he had spent their entire life together proving it was true. The years continued to pass, gentle and kind. Garrett and Tabitha grew old together in their mountain sanctuary, surrounded by the family they had created and the love they had nurtured. They had started with nothing but each other, a broken woman and a lonely mountain man, and they had built something beautiful. On Tabitha's 60th birthday, the entire family gathered at the cabin for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled every room, their laughter echoing off the walls. A feast was spread across the table Garrett had built 40 years earlier, and a cake that Sarah had baked sat in the place of honor. As Tabitha looked around at the sea of faces, all connected to her, all there because she had survived and thrived and loved, she felt tears prick her eyes. These people existed because Garrett had found her on that mountainside. Because he had looked at a broken, discarded woman and seen someone worth saving. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked, appearing at her elbow with a cup of coffee. "That I was told I was a burden my whole childhood," Tabitha said, "but you called me your greatest blessing every morning. And now look at all this." She gestured at their family, at the love and life filling their home. "You were right. I was never a burden. I was always meant for this." Garrett set down the coffee and pulled her into his arms, heedless of their audience. "You were always meant to be loved," he corrected. "And I am honored that I got to be the one to do it." Their grandchildren made gagging noises at the display of affection, but their own children just smiled. They had grown up watching this love, had learned from it what a marriage should be. They knew their mother's story, knew how their father had found her and healed her and given her a life worth living. It was a story they would pass down to their own children, a testament to the power of love and kindness. As the celebration continued around them, Garrett leaned down and whispered in Tabitha's ear, "Happy birthday, my greatest blessing." Tabitha smiled up at him, this man who had given her everything, and whispered back, "Every day with you is a blessing." They had come so far from that autumn day in 1876, when a broken woman fell off a mountain and a lonely man saved her. They had built a life, raised a family, and proven that love could heal even the deepest wounds. And every morning for the rest of their days, Garrett would wake beside Tabitha and tell her she was his greatest blessing, and she would believe it with her whole heart, because she was. They both were. Blessings to each other, proof that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we are meant to be. Tabitha had been thrown away, discarded as worthless, but Garrett had seen her true value. He had picked up the pieces and helped her put herself back together, and together they had created something beautiful. In the end, that was all that mattered. Not the pain of the past, but the joy of the present and the promise of the future. They had found each other in the wilderness, two lost souls who became each other's home. And in the wild, untamed beauty of the Colorado mountains, they had discovered that love, real love, could transform everything. Their story was not one of princes and palaces, but of hard work and harder winters, of children raised and challenges overcome. It was a story of a mountain man and the woman he saved, who saved him right back. It was a story of two people who looked at each other and saw not what they had been, but what they could become together. And every morning, for all the mornings they were blessed to share, Garrett Kincaid would wake beside his wife and tell her she was his greatest blessing. Because she was. Because they both were. And because some truths are worth repeating every single day, until they become as natural as breathing, as constant as the mountains themselves. Tabitha Garrison, who had been told she was a burden, had become Tabitha Kincaid, who knew she was loved. And that made all the difference.